Matt Whitaker, former U.S. Acting Attorney General.
This is such a great conversation about America, our future, what's going to save our republic.
We have a great football player. Matt Whitaker is here. Matt.
They tried to bury me. They didn't realize I was a seed.
It's a touchdown. Whitaker.
Former acting U.S. Attorney General.
Under President Trump.
I'm going to be an unwavering supporter of law enforcement.
Welcome to Liberty and Justice with your host, Matt Whitaker.
Hey, welcome to Liberty and Justice. I'm your host, Matt Whitaker. Remember, you can see us 7 p.m. every Friday on CPAC Now. Also, Whitaker.tv is everything I'm doing. And anywhere good podcasts are distributed, including Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and the like. I'm here at CPAC Australia in Sydney, Australia, with my good friend Keith Pitt, Member of Parliament. Good to be with you.
Oh, it's fantastic to be here at CPAC in Sydney, Australia. We all know about the Harbour Bridge and everything else, but this is a wonderful place to be, and with people who are like us and have our values.
Well, and I think this is, I've been around the country at several CPAC events, including Israel, here in Australia, and I think this is one of the most important things that we do, is to not only say there are others like us that share sort of this idea and concepts of lower taxes, individual liberty, freedom, sort of a person's right to choose their destiny without unnecessary government interference and challenges. And so, let's talk about, you were the former resource minister here in Australia, federally, and so essentially the equivalent of a cabinet secretary. Probably Department of Interior is probably the closest. I'm trying to think who you would have done the bilaterals with in the federal government. But,
Yes.
Tell us a little bit about your experience, and then, kind of what the hope is, after this last national election, going forward for folks in your party and in your movement.
Well, under the Westminster system, I was a cabinet minister. My responsibilities were around resources and water in Northern Australia at one point, and it's a big part of our economic story. So we have very large exports out of Australia for both agriculture and resources, for coal and oil and gas and iron ore and a whole pile of other products. But it's how we pay our bills. In Australia, this is how we pay our bills. But we're a little bit different in that here the Liberal Party and the National Party make up a coalition federally. We are the parties of liberty and freedom in Australia.
Yep. Tell me about the area you represent, and I guess for the people in the United States that don't have a sense, in the United States, for example, Michigan and Wisconsin do the hand thing, and they point on their hand where they're from. So just Queensland is obviously north of New South Wales, which is where we're sitting right now. But tell us just geographically where you represent, and tell me about the people that you represent.
So my hometown of Bundaberg is about 360 kilometres north of Queensland's capital, which is Brisbane, and that's right in the southeast corner, around the Gold Coast, the Sunshine Coast, all those lovely parts of the world. So the people I represent are out hard-working individuals. There's a lot of agriculture, a lot of farming, and a lot of tourism. We have a lot of tourists, and before COVID, we had a lot of backpackers who would come in, work in our agricultural areas, particularly whether it's in horticulture. We've got a lot of macadamia nuts, bopple nuts.
Delicious.
Yeah, no, they're fantastic, exported around the world. Sweet potatoes, a pile of other horticulture pieces. But predominantly, they're just good people who want government out of their lives and the ability for them to pay their own way through the hard work that they do. And unfortunately, as you've said, we, the Conservative side of politics, lost at the last election. And I think we'll see moving forward, Labor will move back to its traditional tax and spend model.
One of the unique and interesting things about Australian politics is you have a compulsory voting system where every citizen has to vote or they're fined. And so then that ends up, we're always talking about the low information voter, the person that's not paying attention and decides at the last minute. How is that even enhanced with the compulsory voting system in Australia?
I think it's probably worse, would be the truth. So in my seat, I have roughly 117,000 voters in the federal seat of Hinkler. Turnout is probably around 90%. So there's still people who risk the fine, but this election in particular, the one that's just gone, there was a much higher rate of individuals who hadn't made their mind up before they got to the booth, which is very, very unusual. So it was really important that our volunteers were out, that we're out there loud and proud and flying the flag for the things that we believe in. But you're exactly right. We are a full preferential system, so every vote counts. And to give you an example, I've got a colleague who was around a town called Toowoomba, And he ended up in a runoff with someone who started on 8% primary. So just 8 in 100 votes, and yet they finished second under the preferential system. So, yeah, it's a bit weird.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the interesting ththings as I get around the world is how different these folks that call themselves, democracies or republics or commonwealths, whatever, but a system where the people are in charge and elect their representatives, how, sort of differently we can get to the same result. So what do you think as we head forward in Australia with the Labor Party, which is the left wing in control of Australia? I'm sure they're trying to implement their crazy left wing policies of we call it wokeism, but it's the same thing. It's the pandering to the environmentalists, the Greens, and the like. How do you see? Do you expect them to overreach? I mean, you're going to be in Parliament having to sort of vote on these matters they're going to propose, but how do you what do you see them trying to accomplish, and then how are you and your comrades going to colleagues going to oppose that or try to direct it in the right way?
Well, we've already seen federal Labor. They made statements this week that they don't think there'll be any more big gas projects in this country. I mean, gas was about $70 billion last financial year. That's a lot of things to want to try and rub out. So I think from any position, that is the wrong decision. They take a very ideological view, whereas on our side, Conservatives take a practical view about things that work. And we have a federal energy minister now with the Labor Party who quite simply doesn't care whether things work or not. As long as he builds his 2 million hectares of solar panels and 10,000 wind turbines, they'll be happy. But that will have a real impact on manufacturing, which will have a real impact on real people with real jobs. And that really concerns me and every other individual I know on our side of politics, because without that sovereign manufacturing capability, you are then reliant on other countries to provide the critical equipment that you need to make your nation run. And right now, predominantly, that is China. And I think that's something we need to be very concerned about.
Yeah, and I was really impressed with the really post-COVID outbreak, how Australia was willing to challenge the Chinese, understand kind of that their worldview maybe is not consistent with the people of Australia's worldview. And I know that you're much closer, and obviously they are a market for your resources. And there's been some trade challenges with China that they've tried to, much like when they went after the American farmers with draconian tariffs on our corn and soybeans and the like. I know that they did similar things to certain industries to try to put pressure on the electeds in Australia. Why don't you talk a little bit about what the Chinese mean to Australia and how that relationship's going to balance out long term?
Yeah, it's a big market. And I guess a couple of easy examples. They stopped importing Australian rock lobster, and roughly 90% of Australia's rock lobsters were going to China in live trade. It was a fabulous trade, really well organised. They stopped taking our coal, our thermal coal. Now we managed to secure other markets, so the companies here always had good relationships with other countries, and so the impact of that has not been as high as was expected. But I think internally what it meant was China in particular shifted to more gas use, which takes that out of the market for production of things like urea. The urea price goes up, which means it's more difficult for farmers to produce food. And I think in the future, in the very near term, we will see famine in a number of locations because they simply can't afford fertiliser to grow crops. You've only got to look at what happened in Sri Lanka. This idea that government regulated to go organic, and it meant that they lost 60% of their production plus and most of their export from tea because they had no product, and now they find themselves in a very difficult economic position. I mean, this is what happens when idealists are in charge.
Well, this has been a brief discussion on so many things we could have talked about. This is someone that you're going to want to keep an eye on. I think he is, really a leader in the conservative movement, which you guys call liberal, which is so confusing to Americans. Liberal national. But he's somebody that you're going to want to keep an eye on. long term, because I think he is as we've walked around CPAC this morning, we have seen a lot of folks that not only recognize him but thank him for fighting the battles and expected to fight future battles as well. So we're going to be right back with another guest. You're watching Liberty and Justice with your host, Matt Whitaker from CPAC Australia. Stay tuned. Welcome back to Liberty and Justice. I'm your host, Matt Whitaker. My second guest today here at CPAC Australia is Joel Riddle. Now, the funny thing is, unlike the Member of Parliament, he's going to sound a lot like you and me because he's actually an expat. He's lived here in Australia for about 10 years. He's from Alabama, but he's working on a very exciting project, actually, and that's the development of one of the largest shale gas basins in Australia. So why don't you first tell us about your company, and then we can talk college football and how much the University of Alabama is struggling this year under Nick Saban. But Go ahead, Joel.
Well, Matt, very nice to be with you, and pleasure to be here at CPAC. And Tamboran Resources, to give everyone a little bit of a background, we're focused in the Northern Territory. It's in a basin called the Beetaloo Basin. It's one of the largest untapped gas resources in the world.
And by the way, Beetaloo is one of the greatest Australian names ever, I think. There's lovely, Aboriginal names all over this country, but Beetaloo has got to be one of the top.
Just rolls off your tongue. It's but great basin. This is a basin that looks very familiar to my eyes, having worked in the U.S. Looks very similar to the Marcellus Shale. In the great state of Pennsylvania, kind of the similar scale, hundreds of TCF of gas. This is a country that desperately needs new gas production. So we see the development of the Beetaloo being a key piece to the energy mix here in Australia moving forward, and really energy mix and worldwide LNG. So huge scale and huge opportunity.
Right. And as we speak, obviously there's been some real challenges with Russian gas coming into Europe. We've talked about on this show before how Germany canceled 2 LNG terminals to receive both United States and Australian natural gas, and they went all in on Nord Stream 1 and 2 and it's not turning out very well for them. One of the top stories that I've read recently is that Germans are stocking up on firewood in expectation of a long, cold winter. So that obviously the challenges with the Ukraine war and Russia and Russian gas is going to open up some great markets for LNG out of Australia. And obviously you've raised a lot of capital, and the great news for your company is you're about to start pumping gas. You have the rigs coming in, and you're going to really, I think, kind of turn this basin into a very important piece of the worldwide energy solution to Russian aggression.
100%, and that's one thing I'm really proud about is with my background in the U.S. and we've been able to raise a lot of money from the U.S. capital market. We are bringing in modern U.S. rigs into the basin next year. It's the first of 5 rigs from the largest U.S. rig provider onshore called Hemrick and Payne, H&P. This is the latest technology that we think is going to be key around accelerating development and start pumping gas into the system. These are rigs that have the capability of drilling very long horizontal wells, similar to what you see in the Marcellus and the Permian Basin and the Eagle Ford Shale, 15,000 foot type horizontal wells. And, that's been one of the bright spots happening in the U.S. over the last 10 years is the shale revolution. And so part of my drive is to bring all that technology, all that drive, all the capital into the Beetaloo Basin. And pretty excited because the basin really has the potential to really move the needle, not just here in Australia, but around in Asia-Pacific LNG in Europe, to address a lot of the shortfalls that folks are dealing with and facing cold winters coming up in Europe. It's a real issue.
So in the Northern Territory, tell me about the challenges that you face. It's not a super watery. It's fairly dry. It's not, I wouldn't call it desert, but it's certainly very arid. And it's sparsely populated. And
Correct.
So you're going to not only have to bring sort of these modern procedures, but yeah, I'm sure that leasing the land or getting the right permits and all that is something you've been working on for some time. Tell me about those challenges and how you overcome those challenges.
I've been in this job 10 years, and all 10 of those years we've been focused in building really good relationships with the government. That's one of the key focuses of mine. Having worked in the U.S., I understand how important those relationships can be as it relates to getting the right permits. Mm-hmm. There's a lot of work ongoing on the ground with the traditional owners that, we operate on their land, and, lots of time has gone into building those relationships as well. And you're right, this is in the middle of nowhere. This is not a lot of infrastructure in place, but with that is opportunity. And so when the basin will get developed, we think there's just really strong potential for economic prosperity in the Northern Territory. We've had an independent analysis conducted that says our development will produce over 6,300 jobs in the territory. Billions of dollars in new revenue in the form of royalties. Mm-hmm. And this will go toward building new schools, new roads, new hospitals, and just improving the way of life. And so much like what I've seen in Midland, Texas, actually, where, the development of the Permian, who, I have a lot of friends back home in Texas that, have seen through the development of the Permian Shale, you've seen this transformation of Midland, Texas. We think the same thing can happen in the likes of Darwin, other small towns in which we'll operate around. So this is part of my drive. Being an American, I've seen, kind of this pursuit of capitalism and liberty and freedom. Yep. And this is sort of where I grew up in Alabama. This is kind of the values that I was raised with, and I think this is the kind of energy I think that's required to unlock the Beetaloo.
Yeah. What is, as you've lived here in Australia for a decade, tell me some of the cultural adjustments. I mean, it's a beautiful country, a lot of beaches, a lot of opportunities to live on the water. It seems like most of the 25 million people who live in Australia live on the water in some way. Why don't you talk a little bit about your transition here to Australia and what you found and enjoyed, and what you found a little frustrating maybe? Other than driving on the wrong side of the road.
That took some time to get used to, but I think overall it's been a very, very good transition. I think a lot of similarities between the U.S. and Australia around common values. I have a family that I moved over here to Australia with, and it's interesting because when I left the U.S., I had a son and daughter all playing the American sports, and now my son surfs every day and, is out playing volleyball and kite surfing. And, I think it's been a great transition from a family perspective. A lot of good conservative values I think are being shared here in Australia, and in a very safe area where I live here in Sydney. Some of the challenges I think, is very consistent to all the challenges we have around the world in democratic areas where, we're under the attack of the far left. My industry is under attack, and I think there's a lot of activism. Things I've been familiar with in working in the U.S., but I think there's just an enhanced awareness of that, given where we are. And here in the political landscape in Australia, what you find is there's a party called the Greens.
And at least in one of the states, they've banned fracking.
Yeah, exactly. So, it's
thankfully not Northern Territory.
Yeah, not the Northern Territory. Northern Territory is more like Texas, I think. It's more akin, and Queensland is very similar. So this is where, there's not as many issues, but, there's in the main city centers, you get a lot of the activism similar to what you see in California, New York. And so that's a constantly something that I would say is an adjustment, that I've had as an American working here. There's a lot of, issues that come with that. A lot of publicity, a lot of media that it turns up in a very negative way. And for me, something I learned from my father growing up is you just keep your head down, you work hard, and put one foot in front of the other. And so, those challenges can be overcome, and I'm up for the fight.
Yeah.
You know, so
before we get into talking about college football and how you've kept up being, sort of we're about 14 or 15, depending on the time zone, about 13, 14, 15 hours ahead. So today is Saturday.
Right.
It's Friday in the U.S., Friday afternoon, early evening. I wanted to talk just briefly about the food here in Australia. There's an abundance of food. A lot of, obviously it's a net exporter, as we talked about with the former resource minister, Keith. It's a net exporter of food and of agriculture. But there's some unique things here that you don't get. Like Vegemite is a very unique,
very strong
thing. Yeah, I passed on that. I probably should have tried it. But were there any other unique foods that you've encountered in Australia that you've actually come to enjoy?
Yeah, well, we talked about it the other night around the crumpets.
Yes.
The crumpets are something.
I had some of the most amazing crumpets a couple days ago.
I would definitely encourage anyone visiting to Australia to enjoy the crumpets that we offer here in Australia. I think, of course, wine is a huge feature in the society here in Australia. Great wine, similar to some of the great wines we see in France and Northern California. From a food perspective, I'm a big meat and potatoes guy.
Yep.
So, the meat here is some of the best in the world.
Good beef here,
Australian beef. So you get a good steak, similar to what I'm used to in Texas.
Mm-hmm.
I think between wine and good beef and obviously the crumpets, that I think we share the enjoyment on. I think, there's lots to like about, if you're a foodie, there's lots of opportunity.
We had an interesting conversation about coffee earlier. First of all, I was having a hard time finding drip coffee. But I finally figured out that a long black was the equivalent of Americano, which is kind of as close as you're going to get to drip coffee, where they don't make drip coffee.
Yeah, that's exactly. That's what I'm used to drinking in the U.S. And that was a big experience for me coming over to Australia as well, as all the different kinds of coffee, and they're really, I would say, some of the best coffee in the world. But again, where I grew up, is just one option.
Right.
And so I
it was out of Mr. Coffee 12-cup drip coffee maker. Yeah. What we're here at CPAC Australia, and there's a 2-day session this weekend. I think there's a lot of excitement. It's most of the speakers are native to Australia. There's a few international speakers, including myself. What do you expect? Sort of as you're going to attend these sessions, to hear, to learn. What are you hoping to get out of CPAC Australia?
Yeah, look, I think this is a great opportunity to share, kind of common ideas that we have in the conservative sort of party. I think, for me, this is just, such an awesome opportunity because, it's, folks like yourself coming in town. And I think, from all the talks we'll have today, the talks we'll have tomorrow over lunches, what I see is just this opportunity to really recognize how, the conservative voice still remains. It's obviously there's a lot of heightened volume from the left, and we'll always have that. But for me, it's just this eye-opening that there is a significant right conservative voice that's in the system. I think that's something to celebrate this weekend, and it's something that I think from my industry's perspective, that's constantly under attack. I think for me, I like to see the common thread being how can we work together.
Yeah.
This is a team kind of scenario where we have to learn who our friends are.
Yep.
And we all have a bit of a role here to play to combat the onslaught of the left, and that's something I'm pretty passionate about, and it extends for me beyond the oil and gas industry. So it's just a great opportunity to meet folks like yourself and to form partnerships that I think will continue moving forward.
Well, it's my pleasure. But before we sign off on this episode of Liberty and Justice, let's talk a little bit about, as a American football fan, how have you been able to keep up with your favorite teams and make sure, because for me, college football in the fall is the best time of the year. It's the weather's usually very pleasant. Plus you have these great rivalries, all over the SEC and the Big Ten and other football conferences. So how have you been able to keep up? Because I mean, I know you're a big fan of of American football.
Yeah, big time. So, it's part of it is just learning to wake up early, even on a Sunday morning. The game that I usually watch is the SEC game on CBS at 5:30. It kicks off over here in Sydney. So I've learned to, wake up, and I think my wife thinks I'm a crazy person by waking up so early, but that's really from my passion that I have for the game. Of course, I'm a big Alabama fan, Roll Tide, and big Nick Saban fan, and so
I'm going to try to resist my parochialism.
But I think for me, it's you have to get used to watching games in the morning. Usually what I'm used to is you have a tailgate starting 10.
So you're not getting up an hour early and shotgunning beers and grilling brats and doing that.
No, it's
just enough to get up to watch kickoff.
Yeah, you're drinking coffee and eating your breakfast and watching, which is a little getting used to, but. Yeah, look, me and a few friends over here that are Americans, we get up and maybe have a beer, sort of to celebrate, the college football season coming up, and it's not something I've let go since I've been.
So
over
how do you feel about Alabama, Georgia when they finally collide in a few months?
I think it's what Georgia has been able to do under Kirby Smart is just recreate what Nick Saban has done in Alabama. Yeah. So it's a mirror image, and so it's I look forward to seeing this game. Hopefully it'll probably be in the SEC championship, and it's just two teams that are highly disciplined, highly talented. And then you got these two teams ramming together, and it's just sets up every year to be a wonderful game.
Yeah.
So,
it's always interesting. The first half is usually fairly slow, with each side trying to figure out what's going to work, and a little bit of a almost like a fencing match, trying to find vulnerabilities, and then usually it just sort of opens up suddenly to almost a shootout.
Yeah, right at the end. Yeah, that's what happened in the championship game last year, and unfortunately Georgia came out on top. But I think the thing about Saban is he continues to recalibrate, and he's a man, and he studies the film, and he'll I think Kirby Smart will have his hands full here.
So I had a chance to meet him. The year that they won the national championship, probably was 2018, 2017, somewhere in there. They came to the White House, and we went over because I was working for Senator Sessions, who was then the Attorney General, and I was his chief of staff. And we went over, and I had a chance to have a conversation with Nick Saban because he had been at Michigan State as a coach, and he, talked about how much he, kind of didn't like playing the University of Iowa Hawkeyes because really those it's a fist fight in a phone booth. I mean you may win, we may win, but it's like both you're going to be
coming out bloody.
It's very physical. So it was really nice to meet him, and then the next year I was able to meet Sweeney, Coach Sweeney from Clemson, and that was also a very cool opportunity to meet these football coaches. And I have. Also, at Iowa, Coach Fry has this long tree that includes all the Stoopses, including Mark, who's the head coach at Kentucky, and they're doing very well. And a guy named Brett Bielema, who he and I came in as freshmen together, and he's now a head coach in Illinois. And so there's these guys that I played with and know very well that are now coaching all over the United States, and it's very interesting to head football coaches are all very connected. It's because so if you lose your job, you better have some friends that can give you your next job. And so it's a very interesting small culture. But, it's been really enjoyable time here at CPAC Australia. Joel, thank you for your time. Best of luck on your massive endeavor, hundreds of millions of dollars being invested in this effort. And I know you're going to be wildly successful. And when you are, I'll say I knew that guy and had him on the show. But that concludes Liberty and Justice this week. We're here at CPAC Australia in Sydney, Australia, in New South Wales. Just a beautiful place. Highly recommend it. Next year, I'm planning on coming back. And so I would invite all the people that are viewing this or listening to this to come down to CPAC Australia as soon as you can. Again, I'm Matt Whitaker. This has been Liberty and Justice. You can see us. Whitaker.tv is the best place. Otherwise, CPAC Now every Friday at 7 p.m. Eastern or anywhere that good podcasts are distributed. So thank you, and
appreciate it.
All the best from Down Under.